All right, all right. Welcome back, welcome back. Okay, where am I boxing? There we go. I don't want to stand in front of you. Okay. Can we get another microphone by
Do we
chance, or
have
do we need to
any
share?
additional microphones, or this the last one? I
We,
mean, we can share
we can share. We can
if we
share. I
have
think
to.
we can share. All right, well, so welcome back. We're having, do y'all mind moving down closer to us? We won't bite. You do mind?
I'll get you
Okay.
on. Let people see what they want to
I
see.
can't see your face behind that mask, but I'm going to just say okay. Well, no, welcome back to the Shift Happens post-lunch discussion, intergenerational conversation. And we've got a few distinguished panelists and guests that engage in that conversation. And just really want to have an open dialogue about what engagement, and how do we equip and how do we lead from an intergenerational, with the intergenerational consideration in the church, and just with the impact that we're looking to make. So real quick, a quick introduction of each one of our panelists and our guests, and then we'll start with the conversation.
Hello, my name is Kylan. I am the Director of Restorative Practices for Neighborhood Church Atlanta, and I'm the creator of the Black Seminarians Table.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kayla Scott. I'm a junior accounting major from the illustrious Howard University. And I also attend the Wesley Foundation meetings at Howard University, and I'm so glad to be a representative here.
Good afternoon, I'm Peyton Parker, and I serve as the Wesley Campus Ministry Director at Texas A&M Commerce.
Hi, everyone. I am Mickey Grace. I am the pastoral intern. Excuse me, y'all. It's been a long day. But pastoral intern for National Network of Young Adults.
Good afternoon. My name is Bryant Phelps. I'm the senior pastor of Church of the Disciple in DeSoto, Texas.
Good afternoon, I'm Marquise Hobbs. I'm the Associate Pastor of Discipleship at Faith UMC here in Southwest Houston.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ernest Salisbury. I'm the former university chaplain and Director of Religious Life at Dillard University.
Awesome. And once again, my name is Derek Walker, pastoral intern with the National Network of Young Adults. So let's jump right into this conversation, and we're just going to keep it open. We do ask that the responses kind of stay under 30 seconds or less, if you will. No shade to Mickey. That was funny. All right, so when we think about intergenerational, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And I know for me, I think about just the interaction between a variety of age groups. When you think about what's worked for you, where you are, from an intergenerational perspective, what's working well in your space of what you're doing and where you are? Anyone?
For me, I think that looks like collaboration and mentorship. I think at this point in my walk as a Christian and a real believer in Jesus Christ, I really need mentors, and that's one thing I look into all the people I see at the church, whether it's back home or here at this amazing conference. So definitely mentorship.
Anyone else?
I'll speak. I have been blessed to have quite a few amazing mentors, and I think what has really worked well is, this equal partnership, right? Like having a mentor where equal partnership is valued, and the older person or the more seasoned person or the more established person comes to the relationship with a posture of humility and a posture of knowing that I too have something to learn from you, and a posture of seeking, because you have to seek and know, like, this younger person can teach me something. So I feel like those relationships have been the most influential for me, and the ones that I really like to cling to and hold on to when I feel valued as a mentee, right?
Gotcha. No, anyone else?
I think it's the same thing everybody said. It's mutual respect, right? A circle of mutuality that I think I respect you for where you're coming from. You're respecting me from where I'm coming from, where I'm at right now, and that we can forge something beautiful together into the future. So I would say a mutuality of respect.
Yeah, and I think a good practical way of creating intergenerational experiences is behind a common purpose or goal, and that's most often through service. And so we can all get together and serve our community in this one particular way, and we do so through humility and love. That intergenerational experience is going to happen, where now I look up and I'm serving on the left side of me as someone who's 70, on the right side as someone who's 40, and we're both packaging meals together for the community.
So even with that, there are lots of, we're talking about ultimately relationships, right? But also within the dynamic of the organization, there is a hierarchical like, organization of sorts. And so with that in consideration, how have you all been able to effectively maneuver, understanding that as humans, we're all in the same space, but I have a responsibility as a pastor, as a leader, as the person who's guiding what we're doing. How do you manage that within your congregation and within your position?
I think what has been helpful is realizing that your role may be in the hierarchy as a leader, but Jesus tells us sometimes we have to humble ourselves, and we become the student, and let them become the teachers, and that's a lot. It's hard for a lot of leaders because of that ego and being demigods, thinking that God called them to the position to tell everyone else what to do. When actuality, the best way to learn what your congregation needs is to humble yourself, take a lower seat, and allow them to teach you about the culture of the church. For those of us who went to seminary at ITC, know what's in that swamp in those congregations. They're your best teacher, and they will educate you on what they will need, and that's the best way to do it when you have that hierarchy there.
I want to kind of speak a little bit to a story that happened to me that I feel like was really impactful. So I overcame a challenge with a pastor where we kind of like it was deep. Okay, we had got a grant, and I was leading, and then we got the money, and then they were like, "Let me take charge," right? And it was challenging for me because I had been like the leader up until the point where we got the check and things started like rolling. And I remember having a one-on-one conversation with my pastor, and during that conversation, I started crying. And I started crying because I was so frustrated, and I went home to a mentor and told her I feel bad for crying. And she was like, Jesus wept, It's the shortest verse in the Bible, but it's there because he wanted you to know that he did. And after I had that experience, I went back to my pastor, and I was honest with him. I was honest with him about how I felt like maybe he wouldn't have done that to me if I was young, or maybe he wouldn't have done that to me if I was a man. And from that point on, we were able to have a really shifted and transformational relationship because he began to see me, and I also began to see him. So I think that in these relationships, we just have to learn to be honest with one another. And then last thing I'll say is I want to recommend a book because there is always a power dynamic. And there's a book, it's called The Power Manual, How to Master Complex Power Dynamics by Cindy Suarez. And it's really helpful for those of us who are navigating power dynamics in the workplace, church, and in mentor-mentee relationships.
That's good, that's good. Even in the workspace and even in the church space, we have the most diverse generations from the young all the way to even the more elder or the more seasoned saints, as some would say. But Pastor Phelps, talk about your experience and where you are and how you're able to how you've been able to assess with your experience about how to be effective where you are in your church.
I'm blessed to serve a church that was uniquely impacted by white flight, right? It's a 30-year-old church in what we would call an affluent area for up-and-coming black people in southwest Dallas County. And literally, overnight, this church became a predominantly black church. It's only 30 years old, but we have a current average age of 65, and we are in a uniquely millennial city of young professionals, and they're not there, right? And so what we had to do if we were going to live well together is that I had to meet the saints where they were, right? I'm blessed to be at the age that I am now, 30 years old, going on 31 on December 13th, praise God.
All right.
And, but I have an old soul, they say. And so what I wanted to do very quickly was to gather the most active ministry in our church, which was our senior seasoned saints ministry. And so I gathered them together to basically say, hey, I need you just as much as you want me, right? I don't want you to want me because You know, I reflect the demographic here. I want you to want to be in partnership with me because you still have something to offer this community and to God, right? And so what we had to discover was really what was at work in this church that doesn't just limit people from coming to this church, but what are we doing that limits us from living with the people? Right? Cornel West, I took a course with him. Cornel West says that you can't lead the people if you don't love the people. In order to love the people, you got to know the people. Have I got witnesses? So you got to know who you're working with and meet them where they are so that we can all rise together. It's an idea, a concept of Sankofa, as we talked about earlier, where we're reaching back for the wisdom of the past, but we're all collectively moving forward. And then understanding not just what we're capable or incapable of doing, but who's not here at this table right now, and have we kept them away? And how have we kept them away? So.
No, I think that's good. You know, it makes me think about now creating spaces for the good work to be done. How are you, or what are some effective ways where you're able to create space, not to just discover that, but to inspire that or empower that even more where you are?
Black Seminarian table.
Say it again.
And so, count. Okay, so a way that I've been able to do that is by creating spaces that are church adjacent, not church opposite, right? And so I am the creator of the Believers Outlet, which is a space to advocate for marginalized believers, that being young adults and also those who identify with the LGBTQIA+ community, and creating a black faith experiences that is not oppressive and or harmful in any way, that is not where you're not being harmed from the pulpit, right? But people are actually are eager to hear your lived experience and actually come alongside you and not block their witness, if you would. But then also I created the Black Seminarians Table, which is a platform to amplify the lived experiences of Black seminarians, to create a space where we can explore all that God has called us to be in our Black theological imagination without the policing of church, academy, or society. Right? Asking the question, is the academy really molding and shaping us to this standard that is whiteness? Or is the academy really offering us the space to become all that we are becoming and all that God has called us to be? And I think these types of spaces are important because what we see is there's this juggling act happening. Like the church is turning us over to the academy to prepare us for the church. But then the academy is preparing us for the academy. Right? So there's not really a bridge that's being built between church, academy, and society. Everyone's just saying oh, we don't do that work there, whether they do that over there. And so everyone's kind of just sending someone else somewhere else to write the prescription, and everyone's afraid to write their own prescription. So in these new faith spaces that I've been able to create, I've been able to see God move in a beautiful way in spaces of people that would not even enter into a worship service on Sunday morning.
Well, I want to speak to why that's good. Sometimes, if I'm honest, I get so frustrated with church because of the way we're doing it. You have to understand that our generations, especially these emerging ones, they do not trust institutions. We have heard about trust the church, but we've seen pastors sleep with people they ain't supposed to be and steal money and, gossip and do all this other stuff. And we see it every day. So a lot of these emerging generations, they don't trust the church. And what we're doing is meeting people where they are. And that's exactly it's incarnational ministry. And we've got to get out of these buildings. We've got to cede some control, because that's another thing. We want to direct how it's going to go, who gets to speak, what they're going to talk about. And you got to let people be who they are and journey with them to where God is trying to take them.
I think the misconception, to Peyton's point, is that people think that young adults want to be in control of things rather than giving opportunity and space to be who we authentically are, right? I believe that our churches have become so anesthetized by control that they don't know how to relinquish, right? And it's not just about relinquishing, it's about being in partnership with me. So if you're affirming the fact that you desire to be in ministry with me, give me an opportunity, Kylan, to be my authentic, whole, beautiful, bold self, right? So that I think we just need to get rid of that thought that we want to be in control of things. We want to operate in the calling, in the authenticity of who we are.
And that's nothing but, I'm going to just say this, I want to give another resource. That's nothing but operating in whiteness, you know, and if you all have not checked out, you can Google it, the 14 characteristics of pervasive white culture, and really lean into those to try to live outside of whiteness, and create a church that does not operate in whiteness, and recognize that it is going to take a little bit more time, but it's essentially how we get ourselves free from this way of being and thinking.
I just want to add real briefly to that. The thing is, we're functioning in spaces where you have generations that are looking for the word that you use, affirmation. You have the older generations who are in the church who want to be affirmed that we're still relevant, we're still needed. No, don't just throw us away to church nursing home. But we still have a role here. But also you have another generation who's younger, who's knocking at the door saying, hey, we want to be affirmed in what we offer. I mean, you know, this generation, we like affirmation from, you look at social media. You know, we thrive, so a lot of young people thrive off of the likes, the retweets. And so with that, I think that's a good opportunity for us to look at within ourselves, how do we affirm each other? And how do we be in a space, as that's an ITC word again, how we can be and learn how to be in those spaces. And I think the best way for us to do that is definitely, you know, it's just like what Jesus did. He always raised the bar, or as my grandfather would say it like this, he raised a crown high enough where they can always strive to live their life to reach it. And so we have to raise those bars high enough where folks can strive each day to try to live and feel affirmed. Yeah.
No, I think that makes sense. Go ahead. You have one thing to
No,
add?
I was just going to say that our generation, like speaking specifically as someone who is Gen Z, right? I think a lot of us are tired of the hypocrisy, right? Because we believe, when you believe in Jesus, he tells us very specifically that the greatest amongst us will be the servant. So if I know that I'm supposed to see the greatest people among me being servants and I don't see that, that's the hypocrisy. And that makes me reject any notion of being a part of an organization that isn't a servant first in Christ, right? And so we know that because our generation, so many people are servants. So many people are trying to affirm, but they're doing it outside of the lens of Christ. And it leads to so much confusion, right? And it hurts people. When I see my friends, I see the hurt and the pain in their eyes. I don't see the redeeming love of Christ. I don't hear them affirming themselves in those ways. They're only affirming themselves in the universe, but the God of the universe has affirmed you beyond all belief. And
Come on.
it's just so sad, though. I want the church to be a part of that discovery in people. And even more so, you know, the church is the bride of Christ, right? That's supposed to be a representation of the relationships that we see in the world today. And if it doesn't feel like the church is the bride of Christ, but the bride of man, then what are we doing? Like, what's the call if you're just doing what people want you to do, opposed to serving in the way that Jesus has told us to serve?
I would just pose, you know, and I think we need to ask ourselves, what church are we talking about? And you brought it up earlier when we were having this conversation, but I want to kind of bring it out a little bit more as it relates to what kind of church are we talking about? Because, you know, this generation, we know that they're not denominational. They don't identify themselves with the denomination. They identify themselves as having a relationship with God, whether it's in the church or through artists that they listen to, or through a post that they see that inspires them. And so, you know, when we talk about, you know, the church, the younger generation, they're kind of on this grassroots type deal, whereas if You won't affirm us or you won't recognize us, we'll create our own spaces. They're doing it in church as well as the real world around them. We have more entrepreneurs that are young, that are starting their businesses at very young ages, and so the church has to be very careful and be very cautious.
Right.
The same people who we ignore will be the same ones that will create another institution outside of those that we see today.
And that's the real worry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think that's the real worry for our generation specifically, because they're so confused on the tenets of our faith. They don't understand what it means to be a steward of your money in a biblical sense. They know what it means to create generational wealth that will last for 1,000,000 generations, but they're not investing in a generational spiritual wealth that will last 1,000,000,000 generations, that will take over the world until God comes, And it's just so, we need to learn, though. We need that mentorship. We need a teacher, We need a lawyer in a courtroom, a teacher in the classroom. And if we don't have that, then we're thriving on our own understanding and what the world will put out, and not what God has given us extremely specifically, and that you guys are so well versed in. And it's amazing to have these resources, but we need to be able to touch them and feel them and know them in our hearts.
We had this beautiful conversation over lunch, Marquise and I and others, talking about who we've become, right? So when we're talking about systems and institutions and all of these great things, we're talking about an institution and a system that was born out of what we will call a movement. And so now what we're dealing with is how far has this institution moved away from a movement of the Spirit, right? John Wesley going into barns, right, having folks bark and shout, right? But we can't, inspire that same kind of movement. And so what we're seeing is a movement that's taking place, but we want to impose upon the movement a box.
Right.
I want to speak to what Kayla talked about with this hypocrisy. So I live on 79th and Cottage Grove in Chatham, in Chicago, okay? And it is a predominantly black, right, neighborhood, working class people. And within a 2 to 5 mile radius of my house, there are 19 churches. There are 19 churches. And sometimes I drive through my neighborhood. Literally, I cannot walk around my neighborhood, not because I don't feel safe, but because of how dilapidated the neighborhood is, how many people with mental issues are outside, that it do something to my soul, right? And it's frustrating for me because I'm like, we got 19 churches in a 5-mile radius.
Right.
So for me, it's a cognitive dissonance that happens. And this is really getting into mental health, but it's a cognitive dissonance that happens I'll speak for myself, to me, and also pushes me further and further and further away from the church. Reason why I left my church, and reason why, I'm sorry, y'all, I gotta say this. Reason why I left my church, and reason why I've struggled this weekend. So many people this weekend have asked me, what church do you go to? And I have got anxiety on the inside of me because I left my church. I don't go to a church. I left my church because my church was made up of very affluent black millennials, small black affluent millennials who weren't doing the work in a way that I felt like was serving the people who I live next door to.
You know, and even as you say that, the cognitive dissonance is what I think a huge misconception is about the younger generation, or even the millennial generation, or just the younger people in the church, is that, you know, we hear what you're saying, but we also see what you're not doing. Yeah. And it's confusing, right? Because I hear you saying, and you've been touting this and saying, we got to do this and pray for this and make this happen, but we don't see the effort along with the faith. And so it creates this disconnect of the opinion or the idea of the institution. And I think, even from an individualistic standpoint, I think we focus on saying, what can we do where we are to make impact? Is that accurate?
And I think, you know, like I said, we don't believe in the institution. And even though I'm part of it, the things that I do are not to continue feeding the institution. I'm only trying to build the kingdom.
Right.
And That's why I said earlier in the first session about folks having the Holy Spirit. You know, when I relook at the text of Pentecost, I've started to teach it in this way, that the Holy Spirit teaches us and empowers us to speak another language. Because the apostles, they were able to speak people's languages. And a lot of us, how do you get there? By getting to know the people, by spending time, what Acts 2 says, breaking bread with people, whether that's in church or in a bar. Right. Having everything in common. And part of that is church folk love I use this analogy, we wear the mask now, but church folks have been wearing masks for a long time. We know how to come in, we know how to dress, we know how to say the churchy phrases, but the truth is all of us are struggling and going through something. Right. And when we start sharing what we have in common with one another, then we can learn how to speak to what people are actually going through.
Yeah, and I think to add to the conversation that's happening, when you look at young adult studies will show that those who are clergy are young adults who've grown up in a children or youth program that has encouraged what we call a culture of call, where it's created an environment in which it's nurtured the call within the individual. And so in some of our churches, if we are not mindful to nurture the call within young people, then we probably won't see a lot of young clergy come out of that. And the question that churches have to answer for themselves is, are we creating an environment that these young people want to model? Or is it the case that, like we've said, what we're showing is a hypocrisy because what we say and do are two different things?
Well, let me ask you this, any one of you all can answer it. How do you manage understanding the necessity to be part of the institution, but understanding where you are from a generational standpoint and the value of kind of creating a little separation from the institution to be able to maneuver in the world and connect with the people who need to be connected with?
I think my answer to that would be focused on my experience I had this year at Howard. So I'm coming into my junior year, right? And I'm in DC. I have my own apartment in this city. Me and my roommates were like working it out. But as I walk through the streets of DC, I have this anxiousness about me when I see the homelessness issue, when I see the lack of mental health security services that are offered in the city, when I see the presence of police, when I'm dealing with the gentrification. I'm one of the I'm living in extremely expensive housing because I have to go to school, but that makes me a part of the gentrification problem in my area. And for me, it's the institution as well. That's the institution that I'm in currently, and separating myself from the institution looks like humbling myself to Christ, because I had to look to God to ask him to remove my anxiousness from me, to remove my anxieties, to calm my spirit, because if I didn't ask him to do it, it wasn't going to get done. Like, I was going to go crazy. I was feeling scared walking to class. I was feeling nervous, going to see my friends, taking Ubers everywhere, doing this, that, and the other. But in reality, I need to walk with God's people and pray for God's people and feed God's people when necessary, and to gather a community of people who are feeling that same thing and letting them know that we're not alone because God has us, and there's community that we can go to. The church is supposed to be a part of the well. And in order to create that, we have to go to our leaders who want to create that for us.
I think that makes sense. Go ahead, and right before you go, if you all have any questions, you can put them in the Hoover app, and if you got a moment, if you want to raise your hand and kind of speak out, we're open for the conversation, and just really want to make sure that we're all sharing and engaging in an appropriate way. Go ahead.
I think this is the part of the service where I run up to the altar and testify.
Okay.
So I think what makes my experience a little bit different and unique from all of the talented people here is that I grew up in the church environment as a kid. I'm what you call a church kid. Like, that's all I've ever known, from church on Sundays to funerals on the weekend. Right. I've worked in mega churches, and I'm talking about 8,000, 10,000 memberships. Very active in those. And I've actually led congregations. I've done university chaplain. I've been a chaplain. I've tapped into all areas of ministry, homeless, all of that. Homeless shelters. And when you talk about stepping away, these last couple of years have been very challenging, not for me, but challenging for my peers to see that how could you resign as a chaplain of a major university? How could you leave these mega churches and you moving to Texas to do what? And, I wrestled with that because, I was like, I want people to understand that, I didn't leave church. I just changed the avenue in which I choose to do ministry. So every day of my life, I'm a licensed funeral director and embalmer. So every day of my life, I'm dealing with a group of people who do not have a religious leader. Most of them don't even have a church. If you look at the funerals, most of your funerals today are happening at the funeral home. And you have to find a pastor and get somebody to come and try to, do a sermon. And so when I'm sitting in an arrangement for 3 and 4 hours planning Big Mama's service, I'm helping this family walk through the grieving process. So when people say, oh, you left church, maybe your church, but I haven't left ministry. I've just changed the avenue in which I chose to do it.
Well, and that sounds like a variable difference. That sounds like one thing is a noun, one thing is a verb. The ministry is the work and the efforts and the decisions that are intentionally being done to make the connections happen. Go ahead, Mickey.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that separation. So one of the ways that I have been separating myself, one is being a part of the Tribe program. So the Tribe program is a collaboration between Nathalie Nelson Parker and the Interdenominational Theological Center, and really seeking to create this community of young people, and they are our church, right? Like, we are our church. And it dawned on me, somebody asked me, oh, who's your pastor? And I was like, oh, my pastor's name is Nathalie Nelson Parker. I literally said that, and it dawned on me that, oh, wow, this is a church for me. This is a community for me. And I wanted to add to what Kayla said, because I think this is a very important point for us to consider. I think one thing we should concern ourselves with and really be looking at is a lot of young people who are now moving beyond the Bible into other, faith-based practices, and because I've seen a lot of my friends, I have had this experience firsthand. I got a research paper that said there was a survey done, and all of the young adults who participated in the survey about the church and about Christian faith said they were looking for something more, right? And that something more has looked like a lot of young people going and now are getting readings, right? Dabbling into all of these other faith practices. And not to say it's anything wrong with that, but what I have seen is that some of that stuff, it is nothing to play with. And when you don't have a spiritual teacher or a spiritual guide, you can get into that kind of stuff and really create some havoc in your life. So I just think about those kind of experiences that we're not necessarily paying attention to as young people are trying to find different paths to that something more.
Go ahead.
You have a question right there, too. I was going to say, when it comes to what Mickey was talking about, I just have to urge everyone here, ministry, campus ministry, church, whatever you are doing, to stop losing connection with your young people. Myself, I served also at I was a youth and young adult pastor, literally youth and young adult pastoring my peers. I was 21, in this position, when people older than me, doing this work. And I was at a major non-denominational setting. I ended up getting a scholarship to go back into college. Went away to Wiley College, this major ministry of 5,000 plus people. I had over 200 youth that were meeting every Friday night. And do you not know, when I left and I went away to school, I never heard nothing from the church. Right. I never got a card. I never got a college care kit. I never got anything, right? But it wasn't just for them. When I left Wiley, I went to seminary. I had it happened again, and it happens again, and it happens again. Of all these people, we're losing connection, and then we're just passing it on to, they're going to do that over there. We are losing so much connection and relationship with our young people because we give them that $75 book scholarship on graduation Sunday and send them about their way, and then we never connect again. But when they come home for Christmas and spring break and all these other types, we miss you so much, baby. You don't miss me because you have not called me. You have not sent me a recording of the DVD we got this big bookstore over here in the back of the church. What would it take for a group of people to get together after service to pack up some of that stuff and ship it to the college students that we have? We are missing the moments, and we're overthinking this relationship and this connectability. And I think a lot of that's being lost in this language of mentor-mentee. That is such a vague language. I want spiritual directors. I want nonprofit consultants. Like, we have to shift this language of mentor-mentee because it's vague and it's leaving the door open for people to, some people do it really well and some people don't do it well at all, right? So how do we articulate the thing in a different nature? That way we can define really what the relationship is and what the role is as we move forward.
When I left my church and came back to visit on Sunday every now and then, do you know how many people was like, I miss you? And my response was like, I ain't dead. I'm not dead. Phone number still the same, still friends on Facebook, right? You can reach out to me.
Well, and I think that's what we're talking about is when the opportunity, the church at one point traditionally was the only space where we could connect and commune, right? And now with the advancement of even technology and just time, there are multiple ways. So we have to look at utilize a multidisciplinary approach to ministry and just the entire consideration. We got a question real quick, if you would just ask that.
I would say, this.
So as I understand, is you like a clear definition of what church is, so that we in the conversation we have the same, looking out the same window, right?
I think what has the pandemic helped to teach us what church is, and the reason why I say that because for so long traditionally we've depended on coming into a building to worship and have church and experience and learn and get all this information. But now the pandemic pushed leaders. It shifted, like you said, it shifted people to have to look at other ways of reaching people, sharing that story, creating a narrative. And so I was looking at the sign, the title of this conference, Shift Happens. This isn't a question. This is pretty much a word of action. Like, regardless if you all choose to move or not, the shift will happen. God is gonna do what God has to do. And so when you talk about, what is the church? In closing, I'll say this. There was a biblical text, and I'm not a big scholar like a lot of you all. I read the Bible every now and then. And it says this, that after the resurrection, Jesus revealed himself and appeared to the disciples when they were in the upper room. They were overjoyed. Oh, they were excited that Jesus came. But there was one disciple who wasn't present, and his name was Thomas. And they told Thomas about Jesus coming and the experience that they had. And they were all overjoyed. And Thomas said this. He says, if he really is arisen, if this what you're saying is true, I want to see the nails I want to see the nail print in his hands. I want to see the nail print in his sides. I want to see it. I want to see what actually happened. I need to put my finger in his hands. We're dealing with a generation and we're dealing with a church that before we would rejoice over the good news of Jesus Christ. But we're dealing with a Thomas generation. I know y'all got Joshua and all these other generations, but a generation that's saying, I need to see the nail print. I need to see ministry. I need to see you going out. I need to actually feel it. I need to be a part. There's no longer sitting in the pews rejoicing and just shouting about, oh, the Lord can do it. No, we need to see it, and we need to see the hands of Jesus. We need to see the feet. We see the mouth and the actions of people who are doing ministry. So we're living in a generation where they want to actually, that's the church, when we can actually see and touch and feel what God is doing.
And that's what people need, right? Like, we don't need just sitting in a pew. We need to feel the burning sensation of Christ on the inside of us that will spill out into literally everything we do. It will spill into your tongue in the way that you talk to people, that your words be seasoned with salt, that I don't offend you with my Christ. Because some people are offended. When I've said I'm a Christian in some spaces, people are like, oh, what does that mean? Does that mean that I'm going to hell because I'm not a Christian? No, it doesn't mean you're not going to heaven because you're a Christian, but why would you want to be in heaven with my God when you don't even believe in him? When you don't believe in the Jesus who died on the cross for my sins, why would you want to be with him? But I want you to know him because he died for your sins. He died so you could be with me. But so many people are amiss to what the church is and that burning sensation, and they want to feel something. But when you feel it already on the inside, I don't need to touch the hand of Jesus because his hand is already on my heart and I already feel it in my being, you know? And I think that's the whole point of this weekend, is to rekindle that flame in all of us, that our God is burning on the inside of us, and it needs to burn up the entire church, but it's not.
I think sometimes you can define a thing. Oh, there we go. Sometimes I think you can define something by defining what it's not. And I think one of the big differences, and we see it today with people's spirituality, they think that they can be a church all by themselves. But truthfully, my definition, or my working definition, is it's when you are experiencing God in community with others. And not just God, but when you're experiencing Jesus Christ in community with others. That's where you're experiencing the church. And to your point with Thomas, this generation that we're referring to, they need that authenticity. They don't need to just hear from the good news, but they need to know that good news themselves. And sometimes they don't even need to put their finger in the womb. They just need to see the womb. So, yeah.
Took the words right out of my mouth. And so to build on that, I think, in this entire conference where we've been thinking about what is church, for me, using your definition, it's now into what you said about being church adjacent. How do we do life now in a different way, right? So the reality is, it was working for whoever was in the room, even though the door was locked. But for the folks who were outside the door, it has to become real. So we're talking about a reframing of what has just happened. So it's, for me, because I am a church kid, I grew up in the church. For me, it's how do we reframe what we've been doing, right? And how do we make this more tangible so that we can reach the folks who need the community, right, that we're trying to provide. And I think once we reframe it in that way, for me, this week has been really about shifting that perspective, that it doesn't have to happen behind a locked door all day. Yeah. But that we can become, like John 1 says, the Word made flesh. I'm sorry, I get excited when I start talking about the Word.
The only thing that I would add on what everyone has said about church, it's a place where transformation should be happening. And I think one of my frustrations, I talk to my friends all the time, is, my wife was a teacher, and she quit teaching because the mission they said they were about, she didn't see it happening. She saw it was about the bottom line, and she saw it was about how much funding we can get for this STAR test. And it's the same thing with church. As someone who works in the church, we say we're part of an industry that transforms lives. And yet, it's people who've been in church all their lives, and they still got the same hell 60 years later than on the first day that they came into the church. And so for me, a church, God is there, the community is there, but transformation is taking place.
I love it. I think all that is very great and amazing. But I also think we have to get to the space to understand that church is redefining itself, and that we have to be open to what that looks like. I think for myself, because we all work in ministry and we do the traditional standard, what we call church happening on Sunday morning, right? Like, we all do that on Sunday morning. 95% of us in this room could do Sunday morning in our sleep, right? But is it really, is the transformation for us happening in that moment, right? Like, there are times when me driving to church on Sunday morning, my podcast is where my transformation is happening. Like me listening to the podcast on the way to worship. Like it may be the conversation that I'm having with Mickey at the registration table, where that transformation, or where I'm really seeing God in that nature. Like I see God in the humility of Bishop Malone when we got out the car yesterday, and you know, we think like this is a bishop, and like she was helping us get out of the car. So to experience that humility from her was a church moment for me, because we are the church, and it's asking us, like, for myself, whether I'm at the coffee shop, whether I'm at this conference, whether I'm in the physical building, it's how am I living a life to share the witness of the goodness of God, right? So those moments are happening in so many different ways. It's happening at the gathering spot. It's happening on Sunday morning. It's happening in my therapy appointments, right? Like there are times where when I'm in my therapy session, like I see God, and God reveals things to me in ways that I think me sitting down with any bishop, probably it wouldn't happen in that same way, right? Because this person has been trained to do a thing in a certain type of way that the bishop has not had that training in, right? And so I think we have to be open to understand that we don't get to like identify and pinpoint in black and white what something should be, but we have to kind of, in this essence, as we explore the newness, right, of what it looks like to do things on the right side, like how do we lean into the gray space, I guess, if you would, in order to really see what that looks like, because now everybody wants to do digital ministry, but that just means you're live streaming a service that you're already doing. That's not digital ministry.
Right.
You literally just expanded an audience for people to just be to see a performance, basically, right?
Yeah,
like you
yeah,
created a
yeah.
movie theater in your church. But what does it mean to do intentional digital ministry, to create intentional digital community in various different spaces and dialogues and podcasts, and for transformation to happen in that way, and to continue being this ripple effect, if you would, based on the way that I live my life and that I show the light of Christ that lives within me.
So I'm in art therapy, and then I see you. I'm in art therapy, and one thing I want to encourage for all of us from our art therapy is church is, right? And I think that if we stop trying to define it, we got to stop trying to define it through the same mediums, you know? Like, I would encourage all of us to try to express what church is using a different mode, right? A different language, a different, right? Because I think these words that we've been using for so long, it ain't enough no more. We need to try
Well, yeah,
something.
and ultimately what we're saying is that there's an evolution in the midst of these generations. At some point, the older generations saw that a shift was happening. And then the shift is continuing to happen throughout these other generations, but there's no response to it. The shift just happens and you stay where you are. And so there's no movement with the flow. There's no movement with Christ. There's no movement with the people and where they are to make sure that there's a sustained and maintained connectivity. Real quick, I know we got about maybe 10, 12 more minutes left. I do want to talk, where's the question? Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry. So the question is, what do you need to see to know that the church is moving with the shift? And let's take two responses for that.
Very quickly, one of the things that we noticed, especially during the pandemic, was that we never use our building. It didn't matter if we didn't come back, we weren't using it at all anyway, right? So we pivoted real quickly, but then the pipes burst at our church, and we've been out of the church for 9 months, and then we came back a few weeks ago still with the same question. What are we doing now with a $1 million renovation? We weren't doing anything. But by the grace of God and because of great partnerships, this is where I'm going with this, we are planning to host for the first time in the area that we're in, with not very many options for childcare, a partnership with the YMCA to produce a summer camp, which will invite a new level of life in the church when we weren't using it anyway. So the one thing I think that we have to shift our perspectives on is realizing that indeed church is happening in different ways, but now it centers on how are we becoming better partners in this community. And I think often it's the case that we feel as though we're going to make a ripple when we're caught up in one. Right? And so when we're caught up in one, it's up to us to get into what's already happening rather than always needing to be the one that's going to make the splash. So
I think for me, I want to see a reimagination or reframing of Sunday morning, right? Like I want like I know we all moved to like this contemporary worship model where everybody wanted to get to this 45 minutes to an hour, the praise and worship team, like everybody wanted an album, like we did that thing, right? But how do we reframe our Sunday morning so that way the mental health therapy that is happening, like how do we have that person coming in on Sunday morning and available? Like how on Sunday morning after we do maybe a praise and worship and a prayer, like how are we breaking up and allowing the small groups that would happen on Tuesday, we're only getting 10 people, we can now capitalize on the 100 people that we have on Sunday morning by allowing that to happen on Sunday morning. How do we reframe our Sunday morning to embody more of these things that we're doing during the week, but utilizing and respecting the people's time, right, and their energy? Because I don't think to say that we're not denominational, I don't think that's accurate because we're all here in denomination, right? But I think that the non-denominational movement is thriving the way that it is because it's offering this model that respects people's time. And it says like, hey, I'm gonna get you out of here in 45 minutes to an hour. We're gonna do X, Y, Z. If we meet for the small group, we're starting at 6 o'clock. We're gonna be done at 7 o'clock. Like there's not this leeway of things. So how do we, what I wanna see tangible is a reimagination of Sunday morning. I don't think Sunday morning's ever gonna go away. I would love to see it integrate a little more and not be so segregated, but I think that if we reimagine what Sunday morning could look like for our people, I think that would be a beautiful, tangible thing that could really have a lot of drawing power for a lot of people. Like brunch and mimosas on Sunday morning, sign me up, I'm ready to go.
No, I think that's really good. Final comments real quick, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think, especially for myself as a young person, I hit a wall, right? Especially with church, where I was going to church and I wasn't feeling fulfilled, and I was like, okay, this isn't working, I'm just gonna go back home, right? So there was a period of time where I wasn't going to church. And in that, I was listening to church podcasts, I was filling myself with the word, but I wasn't in church. And then I hit another wall, right? Because I wasn't in community. It was Kayla on her own having an experience with Christ that was amazing, but I was lonely. And so then I was like, okay, God, what do you want me to do? I'm lonely. I'm by myself in this room having an experience. And God said, well, go to my house. And I said, okay, God, I'll find your house. So I reach out to somebody. I find myself in the house of the Lord. And I realized that it's not just about church on Sunday, but it's about everything you do in your week to prepare yourself. My spirit is so full when I get to church on Sunday that nothing could shake the spirit of Christ from what's going on in me. If my pastor isn't there, we have a guest pastor that I'm not in love with, that's okay. If I'm not in love with the music they singing, that's okay. I've been listening to my Donnie McClurkin all week. I'm straight. So I get in and I can have a real community experience with Christ because I love God and you love God. So there's nothing wrong here. We can talk and I can have a church experience because I've been feeling myself. And I think that's one thing people need to like really get comfortable with is filling yourself with God. So that way when you come to the church, your cup is running over and it'll spill into someone else. And you can talk about the amazing Darius Daniels podcast you heard this week and how much that transformed your life and how they need to tap into because that's what starts. It's not just the church, because it can only go so far if you're not filled on your own. And I think we have to fill ourselves individually. So, yeah.
I think this is good. We have one more question real quick. Go ahead. Stand up if you will.
Yes, sir.
So-
I think,
so
that,
the
I
que-
think
so
that this
one-
is where the power dynamic comes in a little bit. Because, right, in NYA, and I think this is also where the power dynamic comes in. So I work for a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, and one of the things we teach a lot is helping people in powers of influence mobilize their privilege to get up and hand over resources to those who have not always been in the seat. So I think that there are young people like me, like Kylan, like Kayla, like folks up here who would like to, and like literally me and Kylan done imagined up a whole conference yesterday, right? But we need those people to get up out the seat. Yesterday you said move, and we need that.
I said move. And to that, I think what I'm hearing you say is that you hear us. You're hearing what's happening. It does feel like criticism. It's not the most comfortable, which is fair. What do we do? And I think that at the most deconstructed ground level, and we'll go to this, I think is where we look at community and not just church and not just culture, right? Because there's been a lot of commitment to culture and traditions and practices that aren't beneficial. Because at the same time, in the midst of the criticism or just the acknowledgement of what is, as we can also call it, we have to identify what the common unity is. And that comes, sometimes it starts with a conversation and it becomes action along with that. And so the question is, what are we willing to do? What are you willing to do? What can the result, or what can the impact of what we do when we make this shift happen, what can those results be? And it's got to be a collaboration and less of, I think we have to better define when it's collaboration and when it's cooperation, because we are asking for you to cooperate with us in particular moments. But when it seems that there's a commitment to supremacy, whether black or white, fair enough, right? Institutional supremacy, when there's a commitment to that, we don't want to do that, and we would rather go and do something else on our own terms than to be committed to something that's going to suppress and repress us. I want to continue this. I'm sorry, we've got to cut out because we got to go to our communion, but we can continue this conversation unofficially as while everyone else gathers. Is that okay?
Thank you.
I just really want to.
And the National Network of Young Adults is definitely an institution, part of what we're doing, is committed to doing this work. NNYA Connects is a platform that we've created that is another way to just connect and be of service and to say, hey, here's what I have, here's where I am, here's what I think, I want to contribute. And just being willing to contribute is an important piece. But I've got to cut it off. We can continue unofficially after this, but we appreciate it again, and thank you very much.